Well, hello there. This movie's really cool. Let's talk about it.
In the 95 years of the hotel's existence, there have been 56 deaths in 1408.
56.
No one's ever lasted more than an hour. The first victims to Kevin O'Malley
Cut his own throat.
All right, so today we will be talking about 1408, which is the John Cusack movie from 2007. This is not the first time I've seen this. I saw it in the theater in 2007, and I've seen it pretty consistently in between then and, I don't know, a couple of days ago, a week ago, whatever. So the film is directed by Mikael Håfström, has three writers, Matt Greenberg, Scott Alexander, and Larry Karaszewski. It's based on a Stephen King novel, and it doesn't suffer from the same three-writer problem that Les Divorce did, or other films that have more than two writers. It's a short story, actually, by Stephen King, I should say. Fun fact about this movie, when I saw this movie in 2007, I'm pretty sure it was on film, because I remember seeing cigarette burns, which are the little holes in the upper corner of the picture that tell the projectionist when to switch over the reels of the film, because movies used to come on big reels and there would be multiple reels per film for a feature film. Anyway, we're getting off track here. Samuel L. Jackson also makes an appearance. Let's really quickly explain what the film is about. The film is about a horror writer named Michael Enslin, I believe, played by Cusack, and he is incredibly skeptical. It's also kind of implied that he's like an atheist, that he doesn't really believe in like God. So yeah, he writes these horror books where he really like plays up everything about haunted like hotels. He plays up everything because nothing happens, because in this world, most of the kind of like our real world, most of the places he goes to are not actually haunted. But as it's established in the first like scene, or I guess technically first like couple of scenes, first chapter, and the reason I use that terminology is because a scene is whenever the time of day or the location changes, whereas like a chapter marker can include multiple scenes on a chapter marker on a DVD. But colloquially, we tend to refer to a scene as like a chapter marker outside of the business. Anyway, so the film starts and he goes to one of these hotels and they're all really excited. They're like, oh, this is going to be great for our thing. And then after he goes and like nothing happens, he gives them sort of a middling review on his he's got one of those little like tape recorder things. So he records, he's driving in his car and he records his review and he goes like 5 out of 10 or whatever, 5 skulls out of 10. Or whatever. And then we're at a book signing subsequent to that where the guy who's runs the bookstore doesn't know who he is. The minimum wage employer, whatever, doesn't know who he is. Not a lot of people show up to his talk about the book. One person signs it and that person reveals that they got a copy of his like first book on eBay. And she goes like, there were many bidders, trying to break it easy to him. So of course that doesn't really feel great to him. But then he gets a postcard in the mail from the Dolphin Hotel that says, don't go to 1408, room 1408, and he adds it up, or he puts equals 23 and circles it or whatever. I don't think he writes like spooky or whatever, but he might as well have written like, ooh, spooky. He's a very sarcastic kind of dude because like he doesn't believe in any of this shit. So like ultimately he's just doing a job. So then he goes to the Dolphin and he speaks with Samuel L. Jackson, and the scene with Samuel L. Jackson works very well because it's hard to really explain, but Samuel L. Jackson plays the character very well. Someone who's trying to do the best for, well, he says specifically he's not trying to do the best for Mr. Enslin. He's trying to do the best for his cleaning crew that'll have to like clean up his body or whatever. He lays it on, he does the setup pretty effectively of like, this room is fucked up, man. But ultimately they spar back and forth with each other. He offers him some alcohol, really expensive alcohol, and he goes, keep the bottle as long as you don't check in. He's like, too bad I'm going to. And he's like, God damn it. But anyway, so he gets in the room, and that's the crux of the film. The crux of the film is John Cusack is stuck in this hotel room and it's evil, doing all this shit to fuck with him. And one thing that's really cool about the film is just that element, the fact that it's largely one actor. It takes about half an hour to get into the room, and then he's kind of out of the room at the end for maybe like 15 minutes. So, and the movie is about 100 minutes. So there's a good like hour that he's just in that room largely by himself. Sure, there are intercuts we are introduced to, it is set up that he has an ex-wife. Throughout the movie, it's established that he had a daughter and all these other sorts of kind of more minor characters. And they kind of get sprinkled throughout the rest of the film, as well as ghostly apparitions and stuff. But obviously, they wouldn't be on set. Or like when he's having an argument on the phone with either with the actual receptionist at the desk or with the hotel room fucking with him using the voice of the receptionist on set, that would be delivered by like a production assistant most likely. So he's largely by himself, and shooting in one location with one actor, one of those things by itself is already fairly difficult, but like combining them together makes everything more difficult. And I've said this before, but one thing that's really cool about older films, and older can mean as late as 2007, is the color is very nice. I love the color. This film does a really interesting thing with the cinematography where it really sort of emphasizes, and this isn't surprising they do this, but it's nice. The film, when he first gets into the room, it's very warm and kind of inviting, disarmingly inviting, but then there's different iterations of the room that are with the way it's set designed, but also with the way it's shot. Like, for example, there's a part where the room gets really cold, so we get these much cooler tones, because I'm talking cold like negative. Ultimately it's to like negative temperatures. And yeah, there's different stages of how the room changes and adapts to screw with him. And there is kind of a twist. There are two, by the way, alternate endings on this disc that I didn't check out. This film, which is a former Blockbuster copy, the case isn't, obviously, I replaced it back in the day. But there's a thing with John Cusack and Inside Room 1408, which were apparently web features at the time. And then there were two alternate endings and a theatrical trailer. I did not watch any of that extra footage, but John Cusack does a really good job. I mean, he's an excellent actor. If you've ever seen like Love&Mercy, he's really good in that. He's good in pretty much everything he's in. That's just a really good example. That came out after this, obviously. But yeah, and Samuel L. Jackson doesn't have a huge part in the movie. He basically has that one scene, and then there's a bit of another scene that comes up later on. Maybe he's in the alternate endings, I don't know. But yeah, it gets fairly emotional. There's a decent amount of range and physicality that John Cusack has to go through. And I think one of the most interesting things about watching the film is the way it's structured, for one thing. We get the introduction, obviously, and then things start out really subtly. Really minor shit happens. Like, for example, he's like looking out the window or whatever. At one point he turns around and there's like 2 mints on his bed and he's like, ooh, fancy, or whatever. Nice touch. I think that he says something like that specifically. But yeah, it's pretty interesting it's really cool how we start out super small on that scale and things scale up. And that also he reacts fairly realistically to what happens. And what I mean by that is like, there's a part where he actually gets hurt. I believe it's a window like closes on his hand and it gets all bloody and shit. And at that point he's like, I gotta get the fuck out of here. But obviously it's too late. He's trapped. Ostensibly up till that point he could escape unscathed, but now it's too late. But also the set pieces that are done, or the gags, I guess you could call them, that are done are pretty interesting. Just for one example, I'm not going to try to give away too much of the film, but there's one part where he decides that he's going to try to escape to like the next room over, like 1410. So he looks at the fire escape plan and sees that that's the next room over, goes over the wall, counts a bunch of steps, and then like climbs out the window and starts to do it. But then as he's counting, he's like, where is it? Where is it? And then he kind of like slips a little bit and is like hanging off the thing. And the camera pulls back and you see that there are no other rooms. There's just the 2 windows because it's a fancy hotel. The Dolphin is a fancy hotel. So you just see the 2 rooms for 1408 and that's it. And then when he gets back inside, we see the fire escape plan again and it's completely blank except for 1408. And just those psychological things. And it does that thing that I've never played Silent Hill myself, but from what I understand about it, it really like fucks with the characters and their backstory and stuff. And this film does a very similar sort of thing. There's also more minor stuff, like when they show the credits at the beginning, the 1408, we get this shot where his car pulls up into, if this is the frame, the car like pulls up into the frame and with the light, with the headlight, with the high beams on or whatever, raining like crazy, by the way. And the 1408 like appears and like has these like glare lines going up and down it. And it's just a cool like effect. But yeah, the whole movie is it's just a really good time, you know, really good horror sort of experience. And I would say give it a chance if that's something that if you like horror. I would say if you like Stephen King adapted stuff, I would say it's obviously not as good as like The Shining or something. That would be ridiculous. But I would argue it's probably better than like Carrie, which is a movie that is mostly good except for its ending. But we'll get into that some other time. Anyway, this was Sapphire America from PXKM Productions. Like, comment, share, favorite, subscribe, all that kind of shit. And until we meet again, so long, farewell, I'll be to do. Peace out.
You're watching PXKM Productions, PXKM Productions. Watch me play a game.